I'm sure Dave told you when he reached out that I'm obviously it's a little out of our, a few years later for us, but I'm a huge fan and of Pink's and yours. So
Thank you.
thank you for doing this.
We can
Yeah.
link it to the 80s. We're good. We're good
Yeah.
to go.
Yep,
Well, I mean,
exactly.
she is kind of an 80s artist in a
I mean,
way.
she really is.
Yes.
If it helps for our conversation, I did Slate's Chris Molanphy's podcast, and while we were talking, I'm like, Pink is like the Annie Lennox of the modern day. Like I hadn't even thought about it, hadn't even occurred to me, and I made this really brilliant argument on my feet. So if we want to use that, because I have good arguments for that, and I think there's a lot of parallels between her and 80s artists.
A really good observation.
Yeah,
You're
and I was like,
absolutely right.
why didn't I think of that when I was writing the book? That would have been great, but it's
That's
out
right.
now. So yeah,
That's right. You started the book comparing her to Radiohead, which was like, okay,
yeah,
here we go.
right, exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, she has had a progression. Initially, well, I guess her starting out, it was kind of a little as a teenager, it was rock and roll in a way. It was like the 90s, the early 90s. She was in a band in Philadelphia, right? She was in a couple bands.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm dating myself, but I think Pink and I were born, I think, the same week of each other, like literally to the exact like year. And so we pretty much had the same progression growing up. But yeah, she had a really interesting upbringing. I mean, she, as like many kids, she grew up singing Madonna at first. And her dad was in Vietnam, and so she grew up on also 60s folk music. And then by the time she hit adolescence, it was grunge central. So she was like in a cool, like rock grunge band. And that's when she first kind of started writing songs and putting lyrics to music. And so that was really her, kind of her entryway into, kind of pro music, basically. That and clubs in Philadelphia. She would go there and sing and open mic nights because she had this really wonderful R&B leaning voice as well. So she was always really versatile, even as a kid.
It is similar to Madonna, except, just a different city, but hitting those clubs and just trying to find your way, right?
Right. Well, exactly. And, and she was, and she was a lot younger than Madonna. And so I think that's what's really funny when you look at it is that, she was she was a rebel. I mean, she was very rebellious. Her parents divorced. She took that really hard. And she was kind of a teenage delinquent. She was arrested a few times. She was, she would sneak out. Like she was really like her parents did not know what to do with her. And so she was out of clubs, basically doing things, drinking and just like, and like all sorts of stuff, like really, really young. And so she, and that was kind of, and so, but she always had that kind of musical talent. And she sort of got scared straight because a friend of hers OD'd, I believe. And so she was like, I can't do this anymore. And so she got all of her partying kind of out of her system when she was really, really young. And then she actually ended up being in an R&B group. She got recruited when she was still a teenager. And so that was sort of her entryway into the professional music industry.
So that was Choice, right? That was the
Yes.
band Choice. So you say was recruited. So was that kind of a not manufactured sound, but that was sort of a manufactured band?
It's a good question because she was in this group before that called Basic Instinct, which is also hilariously 90s. It was an all like female R&B group. And then I can't remember if Choice is the one she tried out at a McDonald's, but there was so much going on in Philadelphia at that point because kind of in the mid 90s R&B girl groups were, I mean, the 90s in general, R&B girl groups were huge between TLC, at the end of the decade, Destiny's Child, you had people earlier in the decade like Jade. And so that was like, the group that, basically people wanted to form, obviously the Spice Girls, and they were more pop leaning, but, as well. And so, yeah, she formed this R&B group. And what's wild is that they were on LaFace Records in Atlanta, and they recorded a lot of music, and pretty much almost none of it has surfaced officially. If anyone remembers the movie Kazam, the Shaq movie, they had a song on the soundtrack that was like their big coming out, and obviously it did not go